All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So developing a success strategy. This is obviously, like I said, this is a PowerPoint that is from, another university. And so I did not actually create this, but what I'm curious about is to see, one, do we agree with what they have to argue about being a successful student? And so that's what we're going to be looking at. So your opinion is definitely welcomed here. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one. Your personality type. What type of student are you? So I'm going to name off a couple of these things and just see if they make sense to you or if you feel like it fits you. Do you begin the semester feeling motivated but run out of steam as you approach midterms? Do we agree with that or disagree? When do you typically start to kind of, lose motivation slightly?
When things become hard.
Okay, so like maybe you're the first really difficult test or quiz or something, and you kind of hit that roadblock a little bit, and then you start kind of getting a little bit less motivated, maybe. For
you
you.
have something to say? I interrupted.
The fact that I know that it's only day 17 and I have 73 days in this semester.
Okay. So you start thinking about just how much longer you actually have. And that kind of gets a little depressing, okay, a little bit there, all right. And so normally I always got, when it came to classes, I always tend to, I didn't do as well in the very beginning, but it seems like I finally kind of, got the rhythm down in the semester, and I normally did better, towards the end, the second part of the semester, because, especially if you've taken the summer off, it's more difficult because, you're trying to get back to being a student again. Now, if you've already gone in the summer, you may just be burned out, by the time you start, the fall semester or something. Do you have trouble getting motivated when you are taking a class that may or may not be, your interest area?
Yeah.
Think about all those gen ed classes. I can tell you from experience, there were classes that I absolutely hated. I learned nothing in those classes, and I still made an A, but I don't remember it, because I was not interested in it. It was simply a requirement so I could move on to the next class. What would you say, so far, your experience here, has probably been a couple of the classes that you had essentially no interest in? So what would be an example?
Economics.
Economics, okay. And what else? What's your class that you hated the most or had no interest?
I don't know. I take classes that I'm interested in. I don't usually go for the ones I'm not.
What about gen ed classes? Ones that
I like the gen ed classes.
Okay.
They're easy for me.
I was not a big fan or had interest in science-related classes. Wasn't for me, or math.
I guess English.
Okay. That is a very popular one. A lot of people do not want to take, the composition classes. And so I can definitely see that. Do you get discouraged easily?
Yes.
Okay. Example. Give me an example of when you get discouraged.
When I'm doing very poorly.
Okay. And does it take just one test, or does it take a couple, or
It takes a couple.
Okay, so you're not necessarily discouraged, from one, test, but after a while, you start saying, why am I even in this class, maybe? Or am I getting, well, have you ever thought about, man, I may have to retake this class again? And then you start getting discouraged there, because you really do not want to have to relive that class over again.
Yep.
I see that happen a lot with oral communications. Of all the classes out there, that's the one I see that happens quite often. They get discouraged in that. Because they hate having to record their speeches, and they record it, they end up getting maybe not the grade that they wanted for it, because a lot of times the professor doesn't grade your speech, because some of these classes are over 200 students, most of the ones that are like online or different things like that, and so they may hire some student workers to do the grading part of it, and so they kind of get discouraged pretty quick when they realize the professor is probably not even grading this. So I can see that. Okay, some other things. Okay. Why do you experience this? That's what we have to look at. What, about you get, discouraged and so forth. Is it not uncommon to experience a loss, of motivation or interest? I would say every student at one point throughout the semester will probably, deal with not being motivated. Now I will tell you from experience, I love school. I mean, I absolutely loved it. Now there were a few classes where I wasn't as motivated as I should have been, but through the most part, I really enjoyed it. Because I always kind of felt like being in college was an honor, and largely it's because I didn't start college immediately after, graduating, like high school. A lot of students who graduate, immediately from high school and start college, they're already burned out. My wife was in that category. I mean, she was not very motivated straight out of high school, going on to college. And so, but if you've been out of college for a couple of years, or out of high school for a couple of years, and you're working at jobs that you do not like, you start to become a little bit more motivated to go to school and get that degree so you can actually get a job where you make decent money. And so that was part of my motivation. I learned pretty early on what I did not want to do. And have you kind of experienced any of that? Have you kind of along the way have realized, I don't like my current job, I want to do something more than that, and this is why this degree is so important and why I should be doing well in these classes? Would you agree with that, or not so much?
I'm kind of like your wife, went to college right out of high school.
Yeah.
And then I worked and I loved my job. I didn't have any issues with it. I love working, so
Yeah.
I'm a workaholic, so I can't say.
Okay. I know my wife, I think part of her problem was, she was very motivated in high school. I mean, she was salutatorian at her high school, straight A's. And then when she went to college, part of the problem was that she went to a bigger university than what she was used to, because she went to a really small, high school. So there was that overwhelming feeling, being on, that campus. And then, when she wasn't making an A on everything, she got discouraged pretty fast, because she wasn't used to it. And she actually had to try to learn a little bit on how to study, because she never studied in high school. And so that's, some issues that a lot of students face, and why they're not always the most motivated, because they really haven't been challenged that much, in high school. I mean, how many of you, in high school had to really study hard? I mean, really have to, put in all those studying hours?
Yeah.
Probably not a whole bunch.
Yeah, I put a lot.
You put in a lot?
No.
Okay, I was gonna say, it's like, what high school did you go to?
I could have done a whole lot more studying and passed all my classes that way, but I didn't. I was too lazy.
But you could get away with it in high school. It's a little harder sometimes when you're in college. And so when you do hit that first roadblock, it's, a lot of students don't know how to handle that. And I will always say, at some point in your college experience, you're gonna hit a roadblock, or have a bad semester. And then you have to decide how you're going to handle that. Some handle it well, some don't. Keep in mind that this university, only about 30-something% actually graduate. There has to be a reason for that. Now part of that has to do with just life experience out there. You're working a whole bunch, and something has to give. But sometimes, you get discouraged and you have that trouble that one semester. For some, they can't handle it. So you always have to be willing, to actually seek and get help, along the way. So are there some, strategies, out there to kind of help you with this, what they call academic endurance? And I look at endurance as, not just one semester, but years. Because some of you are going to be in college for a while, especially if you're going to go to graduate school. I mean, I was in college straight for 7 years, because I had to take some remedial courses, but also went immediately to graduate school. You do get burned out. I mean, if you feel like you're getting burned out right now, imagine what it's going to be like on year 6 or 7. It gets tiring, and you have to find, a way to kind of balance, some things. So, is there a formula for academic success? That is the question. Do you think there is a formula for it?
Nope.
Nope. Well, you would be right, according to this. So, there is really no set formula. And the reason why is because every student is different. What works for one student may not work for another student. So, your professor or someone can give you these strategies in different ways, to tell you how to do it. But honestly, it may not work for you. Some of us are more visual learners. Some of us are more, auditory, listeners. I was a little bit of both. You know, I was not very hands-on. I mean, I'm not Mr. Fix-It, so I mean, there are some people that you have to actually show them how to do it. But really, there is no set strategy. All you can do is try certain things and just kind of hope that you find something that works for you. So let's look at some of that. Okay, so strategy number one. And we're going to see if you agree with this, or if you actually do this. Establish goals. So establish goals that are specific, realistic, and measurable. Do you do that? Do you actually have goals for this semester, what you want to try to accomplish?
Yeah.
Okay, example.
I want to graduate. Yeah. That's not until here, but I want to pass my classes. with
Okay.
A's.
Okay, you want to pass all your classes, hopefully with A's. I mean, so that is a goal. Now, how can you measure that? You know, along the way, sort of.
Well, how well I'm doing in the class. We're not moving up.
Light went off. I guess not. It's not moving there. There we go.
By checking your grades frequently, or at least as often as possible. But at the same time, you don't want to check them too often because
Yep.
then you're going to get discouraged.
Yeah.
So just sort of look at it once in a while. And
How many
just make sure
students
you're
do this?
studying and
How many
do what
students
you're
probably
supposed
do that? How many students really check their grades consistently?
to. Not very many.
Probably not a lot. So, but that is a really good idea. I mean, honestly, you should be checking your grades. Because I can tell you, I know a lot of students, I'll ask them, you know, what their grade is. They have no clue what they have, you know, in their class. I mean, they couldn't give me a straight answer, you know, on what that is. And so that to me is always a little scary because, I mean, you at least should have a general idea. Now, sometimes you don't have a lot of assignments and so forth, and maybe, you know, that's one of the reasons why, you know, but most of the time you can look on Blackboard and kind of see where you're at. Even though I do think some of the professors do some crazy math, you know, when it comes to, you know, the grades and percentages, what they weigh and what they don't. And so, you know, you may not have a real accurate, you know, description on that. Also, you know, you need to make sure that you actually write down your goals. One of the things that we do in our program, if you think about it in the fall, when we're doing our first semester meeting, is what?
Write down goals.
Yeah, we write down your goal, and, you know, which we can always go back and look at any time. And so, but that is always something I think is important to do. Write it down because it's not truly real until you write it down. And so, of course, keep goals, you know, posted, you know, where you can see them, you know, maybe on a daily basis. You know, you should obviously reevaluate your goals because what happens if you start off the semester, say, you know what, I'm going to make straight A's, and then you realize about, I don't know, maybe a couple months into the semester, mathematically, it's impossible to get an A in a class. You know, for whatever reason, something went bad, you know, on a test and or whatever, and it didn't work, or maybe you had an emergency and you missed a couple, you know, big assignments, and it's unrealistic. So sometimes you have to be willing to go back and change those a little bit. There's nothing wrong going back and reevaluating and say, you know what, I may not necessarily be able to get an A, but I still have an opportunity to make a B in the class, and kind of so reevaluating and adjusting those goals. It may be even work related, not necessarily even with school. I mean, for a lot of students that I see, you know, they start off the semester working a full-time job, and then they realize working full-time is just not going to work. And so they have to go back and adjust that. You know, so you have to be flexible enough, you know, to, you know, adjust your lifestyle a little bit in order to do well. Because I can tell you, there are some people that can work full-time plus go to school, make, you know, great, you know, grades, and there's no issue. For others, they struggle. And so you have to kind of know yourself and be able to, you know, change or reevaluate those goals when needed. Okay, now the part that you may agree with here. Reward yourself for accomplishment of your goals. What do you do to reward yourself if you do something good or whatever?
Take a nap.
Take a nap, okay. So you need sleep.
Treat
Okay.
myself.
2.
Either get something I want or get some treat, snack,
Okay.
some food.
So you like, I mean, maybe going out and eating somewhere, potentially? Okay. Okay. Mine was always movies. I love movies. So, you know, sometimes I'd go see a movie, or maybe I'd buy a movie. You know, I'd take a little time to just be able to watch that. You know, for some, maybe they like to play video games, you know, so that they do that. You know, but you should actually be rewarding yourself when you accomplish these things. Because if you're always working and you never do anything else, you will get burned out pretty quick. So strategy number 2, manage your time wisely. We're going to see if you actually manage your time wisely. So avoid marathon study sessions, study in blocks, of 1 hour within, like 10-minute breaks. Now, I don't know if I agree with that completely, because for some people an hour, is good, some is not enough. For me, I always preferred studying about 30,
If I
20
stop.
minutes.
If I stop, I'll get off track. So.
Yeah. For some, they just have to do it all the way through. I like to study 30 or 45 minutes or so, and
I'll
then take a
stop
break.
in the middle of it, but I have to get back on track.
Okay, okay. What about you? What is your best thing? And when it comes to, do you do marathon sessions, rushing at the very end, trying to memorize everything because you didn't study all the week before or anything like that?
Sometimes when I find out about a test the day before the test, when I think that I have a whole week.
Okay. Now, is that because they surprise you, or was it just that you wasn't really paying close attention, and then they just announced it in class? Oh, remember we do have a test, but maybe they posted it somewhere else, or just they surprise you?
Complete surprise.
Okay. Okay. And where do you typically see? What classes have you really experienced that the most, probably?
My finance class.
Okay. Okay. And that's what you're encountering so far this semester? Okay, that doesn't sound good. Utilize daytime hours for tasks that require great concentration. I don't necessarily believe that, because some people are night people, and they can study and concentrate just as much as they could during, like the daytime. I'm not a morning person. I know I cannot study early in the morning. It's just
I
not.
study at night.
Study at night.
That's
always
what I
works.
do for work, is because like my work is at night, so I concentrate a lot better and I'm focused a lot better during the night than I am during the day.
Less distractions, probably
Oh,
more
no,
quiet
it's
because
just
most of them
weird.
are sleeping. Okay,
I can study during the day too, it's just I prefer nighttime.
that's how I've always have been that way, and that's why I say you have to find the best time for you, and then just utilize that time.
And I have to have a certain environment to work in, because if I don't have a study environment, or like if it's like a lounging kind of area or something, really relaxed, like my house or something, like being at home, it's really hard to focus on studying or something.
Yep.
I have to be like at a library or a place where there's desks and tutoring, like a classroom or something,
Okay.
You
Yeah,
have to have a certain environment to work in.
I definitely see that. Before, when I didn't have kids, when I was in school, studying at home wasn't an issue. Now that I have 2 kids and I'm taking this one finance class I'm taking for fun right now, I pretty much have to do it here. I mean, I can do some studying at home, but when it comes to taking the quizzes and the worksheets I have to do, I prefer just to come up here, stay after work, and just work in my office where it's quiet.
Because you're kind of like in this work mode, you're just like,
Yeah.
this is work.
Yep. Yeah. So know your environment, what works best for you. Now here's one that we'll see if you agree with this, because most of you are not going to agree with this next point that they have. Evaluate the time needed for each course you're taking. A general rule of thumb is 2 hours outside of class for every hour in class. So for example, if you have a 3 credit hour class, you would at least put in 6 hours outside of class per week for that one class. Now I've seen that number vary. They say anywhere between 2 and 3 hours per credit hour is what I've seen in most textbooks. But do you feel like you have to study 6 or 9 hours per week per class?
Don't know.
Right.
That's too much, because you don't even have that much time in a day. You have work and whatever. It's just too much.
Now that's what they are saying. Now, I can tell you most classes I didn't have to do it that way. Now I will say there were some classes I probably did put in that time or more, in a few classes.
It just depends on the class.
So
really.
yeah, absolutely depends on the class. Like I used to, when I teach the university experience class, when we cover this, I tell them if you are having to study 6 to 9 hours a week, there is something wrong, because you should not have to study that much for that particular class. So it all really comes down to how hard the class may be. Now I think math classes, science classes, especially math classes if you're going to take like an upper, a kind of level math class, because you've got to do a lot of homework and you've got to put in the time, and so I can certainly see that. Also, when it comes to papers, factor in that. You have some classes where you have to write a lot of papers and do a lot of research, And so I,
dissertations
yeah.
and stuff.
so I can see that. Like when I was working on my master's, I had a thesis that I had to write, and I can say I put in a lot of time. I mean, it was, it ended up being like 40 something, I think 47 pages or whatever, because they cut it down after a while. I did have more than that, but it took me an entire semester. I actually even started in the summer before the semester started, just so I could try to get done by December. It was a lot of work, and I certainly I put in more than probably 10 hours a week. So it depends on the class is what I would argue for that. Schedule time immediately after class to edit and review your notes. Do you do that? No. Most of us don't really. I mean, now I will say one of the things that we probably should do is, take good notes, maybe read them, each week, kind of go over them a little bit, but it's kind of hard to look at them immediately after because normally you're going to the next class or maybe you have to go to work. So it does kind of get a little, difficult.
It's better to look at it when you have the time.
Yeah, when
I
you have the
have
time.
3 classes back to back, so I'm half asleep in my first class, and then by the end of my 3rd class, I've forgotten everything from the 2nd class, so.
I think if we lived in an ideal world, this would work out.
I record my professors.
Okay, so that's good. Schedule time before class to review your notes and assign readings. I mean, how many of us really do that?
Don't have time after class to edit and review and before class to review. But there's not enough time to do both in 15 minutes.
Okay. Schedule continual review of previous learned material, not just new material. So constantly going back over all your old notes as well. I don't know. That's a lot of time. I mean, it does sound good. I mean, I do think it would help, but I think in life, we don't always get to do it that way. And so, I mean, I'd always say it depends on the person. I've seen some people take no notes in class, and then they do great on test. I mean, so you never know. I mean, I had to write everything down, but I mean, there are some people they got it. But, they don't have to study quite as much. So continued on, for this strategy, manage your time wisely. Good time management begins with proper scheduling, but also includes the following principles. So we'll look at some of those principles. You have to learn to say no. That means you have to say no to friends sometimes when they want you to go places, or maybe it's work, wanting you to work an extra shift when I really can't do this because I've got a test coming up. I really need to focus on that. So it's really just being able to tell others, no, I can't do it. Do we have a hard time saying no?
Yeah.
Okay, why is that? Why do you think you struggle saying no?
Because I don't want to be known for not being responsible or.
Okay, but is it, being not responsible, for saying no? Or does it?
It's actually better to say no, especially if you're in a tight schedule.
Yeah.
But
it's hard.
It's gonna be hard because you don't like saying no to people.
Yep, I definitely agree. Try not to do everything yourself. Try to delegate some responsibility. I mean, you can see that, in other parts. Look at group projects. Have you ever had a group project where it seemed like, you're in a group, but you're doing all the work?
Mm-hmm.
Being able to delegate some of that responsibility, I think is important. Now, my problem always is I always felt like they were incompetent and wouldn't be able to do it right, and I wanted to get a good grade, so I was a little overbearing, controlling, and I wanted to do it myself because I didn't feel like they met my standard.
You didn't want to just leave it to the wind and see what happened?
No, not with my grade.
Aww.
But that was more my problem. It was more on me on that. Take breaks to improve overall productivity. Would you agree with that? You feel like you have to take some breaks here and there.
Yeah.
Because how many times have you been reading and you get to a point, where you're not even really comprehending or really even understanding what you're talking about at that point, what you're reading, because you're so burned out and tired. So at some point you do have to take a break, get away from it. When I was in college, my favorite thing, I would take a break and I'd go to Walmart. I only lived, just down the block from Walmart where I was at, and so I would just get out of the house. Now back then you could get a pop, the Walmart kind they had, for a quarter, for a cold one. and I'd buy a quarter pop, and then I'd go over to the magazine section, because I was too cheap to buy the magazines, and I would sit there on the ground and just read some of the magazines and look at them. You know, and just waste a little bit of time, and then I'd go back home, and then I'd start working, you know, on
Should've
my
just gone
notes.
to the library.
Could've, but I liked Walmart. I don't know what it was, but for me, I just liked going to Walmart. I also like comparing prices. I liked looking at different products and seeing how much they cost. I know, it was a little weird. And so, but that's what I would do. So find whatever works for you, you know, that makes you kind of relax. You know, maybe it's just simply, you know, coming to our office and letting me bug you for multiple hours at a time. I can do that. I have that ability. Eat well-balanced meals and get plenty of rest and exercise. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's going to help you?
Yeah.
Okay. How many of you go to the gym here on campus? Okay, so you're both, you kind of have like a little, maybe a little bit?
I try to.
Okay,
I go Wednesdays for yoga.
okay, so that's good.
When I'm not doing homework.
And one of the things I always tell students why they should go, you know, to the gym here is because you pay for it no matter what. Whether you go or not, they are still taking that money for it. So you might as well go there and benefit from it. I mean, even if it's just one day a week or whatever it may be, I mean, sometimes it's a good release, you know, to kind of get away from things. Of course, double your time estimates for assignments and start, you know, well in advance of due dates. Why would that be important? To start early.
That way you don't fall behind.
And how many times have you in your life have thought, you know what, I'll get the assignment, I'll start, you know, tomorrow, or I'll start the next day, procrastinate, but then like something actually comes up and you can't do it the day that you planned. You know, like an emergency or whatever, you know, happened. You know, I have a student, I won't name names, but this student was going to do one of his assignments, and he waited obviously till the very last minute to start it, and his computer program that he had at home wasn't installed properly, and it was messing up, and he couldn't get it done. You know, and so he missed the first assignment because of that. But if he would have started a couple days before, he would have known about this issue, fixed it in time, and then did the assignment. And so, but he waited till the very last second to do it.
Bad boy.
I know. So things do happen, so you've got to give yourself enough time. Okay, next strategy. Attend class regularly. Do you agree with that? Do you actually have to show up for class? I know that's kind of a crazy concept.
No, you don't.
No class. So you just basically, just whenever you want to show up, it's like a guest appearance.
You pay for it.
Okay. Now, what could possibly go wrong in that scenario?
Oh, you could kill someone.
Okay, so you're automatically going straight to death, you know, someone could die. Okay.
Because then you're like a doctor and you missed all your classes, but even though you passed your class, you could have killed someone because you don't remember what you learned.
Okay.
You could have learned something really vital in a class if you're a doctor.
Okay, well, we'll go with that scenario. Now, I would imagine that you would probably flunk out before, you know, you made it, you know, and graduated.
No, you're pretty smart, so.
Okay, so I had a professor who, he didn't care about attendance. You know, just didn't care. Show up for tests if you want. You know, he would not dock you points, you know, for not showing up or anything like that. So there was a student who, he was a slacker. I mean, just a slacker. I mean, comes from a rich family. I mean, he had it made. I mean, he got a $2,000 a month allowance.
Nice.
His parents bought him a house for him and his wife. Of course, his wife already had a decent job, but they bought him a house down there while he was being a student. They even helped him get a job with another law firm, you know, because his dad was a lawyer and had friends down there, so he helped him get a job down there too. And so, but he never showed up for class, except for the test. And so, almost every test, I mean, he was the C student. I mean, you go and look at his transcripts, they're pretty much all C's. And so,
he barely passes.
He just bare minimum. And so, but he's getting through. You know, I mean, he got the degree, but he applied to law school. And, you know, he didn't do very well on the LSAT, which is the law school admissions test, but he got rejected at every law school except for where his dad was an alumni, and his dad also donated $100,000, you know, to that college.
That makes sense.
So he did get into law school, but he flunked out his first semester because in the end, it still came down to him having to do the work. So it eventually caught up to him, but he got past his bachelor's degree doing this, and so eventually got him. So, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. His parents will probably continue to pay for, his bills for the rest of his life. And then he'll inherit money. So it does happen. You do see that happen, and people kind of squeak by. But if he would have attended classes, he probably would have built better study habits and so forth. Now, you had an example too.
Poor wife.
I know.
I have 2 classes. One of them, the lecture is not relevant to anything in the book or the theories that we're supposed to know for the quizzes and tests. You have to get all of that from the textbook. The other class, we go through the textbook on our own in class.
Okay.
So both of them could be done with the textbook outside of class. Being in classroom doesn't really get you any benefit.
So you feel like you're not really coming out ahead by going there. Okay. Now I will say, I mean, a lot depends on the professors style, how they do things. Like a lot of the class that I had, we did a lot of class discussion, and so that actually did help us, because it allowed us to kind of remember some of the things that we mentioned in class, and we incorporate that into our test because we had what we call blue books, and so we have to write essays for our test, and so we could go back and remember some of those conversations and things that the professor said, and if we incorporated that into the test, normally we did better because he knew that we were showing up and we were using some of his examples, and you only get that if you were in that class. That's probably why that one student I was telling you about didn't do so well, because he wasn't there for that. And so I guess it depends on the class, in the end. But they do say that, if you are actually going to class and staying active, doing class discussions, that typically you will probably remember more, from that class, by doing that. So
I'm doing pretty well in my classes right now. Like research methods and remembering stuff. I read the book and then I go to class and I remember stuff. But like today, I knew the answer, but I could not remember the word for it. I was like, I know this, but I can't remember. So I'm so mad at myself.
Determine your learning style. This is something I think everyone should find, learn pretty fast when they start school.
I don't know.
Because, well, for example, I mean, some people, they need class discussions. That's what actually helps them remember things, so they're, the auditory learner. They have to hear it. Lecture works for them, but for some, it's not. Sometimes just, a visual learner, you read the book yourself, and that works for you, so, or maybe you have a combination of the two. And then, of course, some people are very hands-on, kinesthetic, learners. This is, I think, really good if you're like a nursing major or something kind of in that area, or even trade schools with like welding and so forth. Actually get in there and doing it with your hands. And so we're almost done here. We're getting ready. So take notes. That's another strategy. Yes, people should hopefully take notes in class if possible. There's various ways that you can take those notes. Now, I gave you a handout. That shows you about the Cornell method of note-taking. That is my preferred, style of note-taking. It's hard to do in class sometimes because you're just trying to keep, track and just write everything down that you can. But outside of class, if you can go back and look at your notes that you wrote in class and work on the Cornell method, then I think it would actually help you. Because the Cornell method, you actually have to write questions on the side, on the left side. You have to write questions that relate to what you're learning in class, and then the notes actually goes into like definitions and details, of what you learned. But more importantly about the Cornell method is the very bottom part of that, and that is the summary. That is why I like the Cornell method, because you actually have to summarize what you learned from those notes that day. And that's not always easy to do, so it requires a higher level of thinking in order to do that. So Cornell method is by far my favorite, but you should definitely be taking notes in class. When I taught government, I had some students that would just sit there and stare, and they would not take any notes, and most of the time they did bad on the exams, most of the time. Okay, so we'll kind of go through some of this a little faster here. Okay, so number 6, another strategy. Read to increase your understanding. So you actually got to read your textbook, which I know is weird. Why would they make you read your textbook? But actually look at it, kind of preview, your chapters. Don't read them at first, just go through them, look at some of the, the definitions, the things that are in bold, kind of, do a preview of that, kind of scan it, and, pay attention to, headings, subheadings, different things, titles, actually look, I like to, when I used to look at my book, I'd always go through it a couple times. I'd look at, each chapter, And then I would also make sure that I actually read slowly and carefully. I'd take my time, not just kind of glance through that. Need to move more. There we go. I highlight. Do you like to highlight your notes or books or anything like that? Definitely a highlighter.
I don't mind.
I like highlighting. Not
as long as it's my book, I don't mind it.
So I'm big a fan of highlighting. Summarize each paragraph and work. Now I don't really do any of that type stuff. Do you create any study guides or anything like that?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Well, I don't create them. My teacher provides study guides,
Okay.
and then I need to answer the questions on the study guide. And then sometimes I will create an index card and study that way.
Okay. Study guides I love, especially if the professor is going to provide that. You can create your own as well by looking at your notes. I mean, that's an easy way to do it. Just go through there, because sometimes you'll look in your notes and you'll have, the professor may cover one thing, but you have like 2 pages of notes just on this one thing. You can almost bank that will probably be on the test then. And then they may just skim something else. So you can kind of pick and choose what's going to most likely be relevant on there. Of course, create your own exams. I used to do that. I actually used to create my own exam, and then I'd go into that classroom on a different day, and I would do like a mock exam. Yes, I had a lot of time on my hands back in the day, so yes. And I had another friend, we would team up. He would create a test, and I would take his test, and he would take my test, and we'd go there. And so by the day that we showed up for the test, we pretty much knew we were going to make an A. It was just going to come down to who was going to win between us, because we always had a bet. Whoever won had to buy the other person a Dr. Pepper, and so I like my Dr. Pepper.
This is your longtime friend that you still have.